The coalition has promised back home a hardline approach to stopping anti-Semitism in Australia. Criminals who target synagogues or other places of worship will face mandatory jail time. Joining me live now is Executive Council of Australian Jewry, co-CEO Peter Wertheim. Peter, thank you for your time today. Firstly, I just wanted to get your thoughts, of course, on the hostage release and ceasefire deal. How do you feel at the moment?
We have mixed feelings about it, as I think Jewish people around the world do, and the Israelis themselves. On the one hand, of course, we're overjoyed to see hostages who have undergone unspeakable horrors over the last 15 months while they've been held captive by terrorists being returned to the arms of their loved ones. But on the other hand, we're also conscious of the other hostages who have not yet been agreed to be released, and also the price that has had to be paid in terms of the future of the whole conflict in the release of dozens, if not hundreds, of people who've been convicted of some really serious crimes, including the most heinous terrorist crimes, and who have blood on their hands. So it's mixed feelings.
Yeah, of course. I can imagine that it would be. Do you have faith that this deal will stick? Of course, we know it's happening over 3 stages or phases. Do you have faith that it will stick? I mean, faith is hard to come by in times like this.
Indeed it is. But look, both sides clearly wanted this deal and have been put into a position where there's enough in it for both of them to overlook the disadvantages that they each see. So there is, I think, some reason to believe that the deal will stick. But the long-term future is clouded in uncertainty because if Hamas remains in control of Gaza, they've been very open about the fact that they intend to repeat the October 7th atrocities again and again and again, which means endless war and endless misery, both for Israelis and for their own people.
Peter, of course, back home here in Australia and the disturbing rise of anti-Semitism here that has been festering since those October 7 attacks. What are your thoughts on Peter Dutton's announcement today saying that he would bring in a suite of tougher penalties, including mandatory minimum jail time for those who take out and perform terror offences? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was there standing next to Peter Dutton when he made that announcement, and we have welcomed it. It does reflect calls that my organisation has been making on behalf of the Jewish community for some time, that we do need a zero tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. We do need cooperation between federal, state and territory governments in the form of a national cabinet to provide the necessary leadership to the various responses that are required to overcome this unprecedented rise in the number of anti-Semitic incidents. And there are many different policy areas that are concerned. It's not just law enforcement, but also education, quality control in our social media, and a whole suite of measures, really, that are needed to turn around this increasing normalisation of hatred and polarisation that we've seen over the last 15 months.
I mean, and many people saying, you know, it's only a matter of time before someone is killed if action isn't taken immediately. The Prime Minister, just a short time ago, speaking, and he was questioned on this, seemingly deflecting calls for a national cabinet and also, I guess, backing these calls from Peter Dutton for this mandatory jail term for those who commit these kind of offences. He says we need more action but not more meetings, but then hasn't outrightly supported what Peter Dutton is saying here. What are your thoughts on Anthony Albanese's approach here to the rise in anti-Semitism?
Well, we've urged that there be mandatory minimum sentences, and it's quite obvious why these are needed. Just late last week, I'll give you one example. There was an incident in Western Australia that was the subject of a prosecution. It was prosecuted under the racial harassment provisions of the Western Australian Criminal Code. It involved an individual who allegedly gave a Nazi salute to and verbally harassed some Jewish people. And under the Western Australian laws, the penalty for that, the maximum penalty, is 2 years imprisonment and $24,000 fine. And the man pleaded guilty, and the magistrate imposed a sentence of a $2,000 fine, which many would see as a mere slap on the wrist and sending entirely the wrong message. And I'm very pleased to say that the Premier of Western Australia, Roger Cook, lost no time in expressing the same view and calling for tougher penalties. Now, what Peter Dutton has announced today is a mandatory minimum sentence for a range of federal criminal offences, but we need the same thing in a coordinated and complementary fashion for state criminal offences involving hate crimes and territory offences under territory law. That's why we need a national cabinet. We need coordination. We need leadership. And they can then give the direction to the Attorney General's Conference to make sure that this is done in an intelligent and coordinated way, and that we get the best standards applying across Australia, and that states or territories that hold out and are reluctant to fall into line are shamed into having to explain themselves for failing to adopt the standards that are adopted at the federal level and by other states.
Yeah, a really powerful example there of why a national cabinet is needed here, and these meetings are crucial, as well as action, and these meetings are needed for action to be taken effectively and efficiently at a state and federal level. We do have to wrap things up, but Israel's Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister has blamed, in part, the Australian government for the rise in anti-Semitism in our country. Firstly, do you agree with that? And I guess here forward, can ties be mended between Israel and Australia? Because on one side, Israel is clearly raising some concerns here and not holding back and coming forth about that. But then you've got Australia and Anthony Albanese saying all is good between the two.
Look, there's no doubt that certain extremist elements in Australian society who are responsible for these violent attacks and also for the violent rhetoric out of which these attacks grow have seized upon some of the policy decisions made by the government in order to try to justify the abhorrent behaviour that they've engaged in. So I wouldn't say that there's a simple cause and effect there. I would just say that it's opportunistic, and that is the way I would define the relationship between the two. As far as Israel and the Jewish and Australia is concerned, I mean, the relationship there is and I think remains a strong one because of the strong bonds of friendship that have existed for 100 years between Israel, even before it was established, and the Australian people. And that has been a constant with governments coming and going, and I think will remain a constant because Israel is the only country in the Middle East that is classified by Freedom House as a free country, a country that shares our democratic values and our tolerant way of life, and understands the meaning of the rule of law and implements it, unlike any other country in the Middle East. So those commonalities will always exist. It will always ensure a strong relationship between our two countries, whoever is in government. But yes, there have been strains recently, and those strains do have to be repaired. And I wish Mark Dreyfus every success in that very difficult but very necessary task.